5 years ago.
Yeah.
It was during the summer, so like doing something.
Look at that. Maybe I'm wrong.
So good morning. This is Atlanta Soda Zen Center. This is January 27th, January 27th, not 2019. Let me get that in there. This is our morning, usually called Dharma Talk. Some mornings we have a dialogue, and not so much a talk. And most of ours are interactive. We generally bring up something of interest, at least to the speaker. We have guest speakers on the first Sunday. And on the second Sunday, we have kind of a social Sangha dialogue around community issues. Third Sunday, I usually myself, if I'm not here, somebody else, we try to take up a piece of the liturgy, such as one of the ancient Indian chants or texts, and Chinese, one of the Chinese pieces that are included in the liturgy, and the Japanese after that. And I don't think we have any modern pieces that are included in Sota liturgy yet. I'm not sure. I guess it's possible, but it kind of raises the question, why are these included in the liturgy when there's thousands and thousands of them, right? All this material that's out there. Why are these included in the liturgy? Well, if you're in a monastery, you do a lot of chanting. You can chant 3-4 times a day, or maybe chant at night too. So you can use up a lot of material if you're in a monastery. But if you're not in a monastery like us, then how much material do you really need for liturgy, right? But it still begs the question, why did they choose, they being the ancients and the wise men of Soto Zen, right? Why did they choose these and put these in? And not only Soto Zen, but other forms of Buddhism selectively use these liturgies. But today we don't do that. We do something different. What we style a contemporary teaching. And so we try to feature a contemporary teacher, a contemporary book, something of that nature. I'm going to today do something a little different. I'm going to, which I often do, I will share my Dharma Bite for the month. So I'm writing a Dharma Bite at this time of the month for next month, each month. How many people open and read my Dharma Bites or have in the past? So yeah. Not everybody opens and reads, and we know we have the same open rate. I think I'll pass. Thank you. Open rate of 15% or so that most online. We even when we send our newsletter out, we think it's around there. So I assume that some of you do not read the Dharma Bite, and so I think it's a legitimate thing to, use it here as a contemporary teaching. And this time, I want to do something which is maybe more typical of design than it is of writing, which, although I've used this in the couple of manuscripts that I put together that we're trying to publish, one has been read by at least 3 reading groups, 3 times, and edited 3 times. So I think it's coming from a design background. You typically are not an ivory tower designer with your brilliant talent coming up with the solution to a problem. You're typically working in a pretty large group. And so we actually train in group processes, group dynamics, how to get to a solution through brainstorming, through winnowing it down, through consumer research, bouncing ideas off of potential end users, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of design of the design process to try to mitigate against the usual 80% failure rate of new products. So you end up designing the design, designing the process of how you design the thing, right? So one of the things I've come to trust very deeply is the group mind. Given the right kinds of processes, you come up with much better solutions and than I could possibly on my own. There's even any genius could on their own. I know this goes against the mythos of the Western culture, but most design is a group process. I found it amusing to read the argument of creationists around evolution and talking about, how these things are irreducibly complex, like the eye. The scientists can show you there's all kinds of versions of the eye out there. They're not, it's like, if God is designing this, he did a lot of prototypes and they didn't work out. And then I start thinking, I come from a kind of corny background, sense of humor. I start thinking about the group process as applied to God. I imagine God meeting with the committee, right? And we're going to design the top of the line human being now. We've got all these others, and they're not so great, but now we're going to do the human being. And, and the way they design us, and they say anything designed by committee is going to come out like a camel. And so there are a lot of people who know more about biology and science than I do that have criticized the design of the human body. There's a lot of screw-ups in it. It didn't have to be that way. It could have been, this could be flipped and that could be flipped, and guess what? You would have no more problem with this bladder or this gland or something, right? But because this thing is interfering with it, bad design. So you come to the conclusion if God is a designer, he's not a very good designer, really. That's the argument with evolution. So anyway, this case, we're doing something we do in design where we do a beta test, and we come up with something and run up the flagpole, and then the team considers it as a possible solution and then responds to it. And here I'm going to try to do that with a little bit of writing. Are you willing to be the guinea pigs?
Sure.
I'm not going to take notes. I'm going to try to remember the things you say so that when I write the rest of it, it's only 2 more pages. So this is 2 pages. They're usually about 4 or 5 pages. So the question here, and the title is a working title. It's another design approach to things. Being willing to change anything to make it better, right? So this is, what is the point of training in Zen? That's the working title I'm using. What is the point of training in Zen? Our new Thursday evening program at ASCC, Zen Talk, is focused on this question. We interview various folks at different stages of training in Zen, from the rank newcomer to old-timers, as well as the occasional guest who has no experience at all in Zen, but may be pursuing another path of interest, such as the guest teachers that Mike brings in on Sunday mornings. We're hoping that most of our Thursday night interviews can possibly then do the first Sunday, right? If they happen to do the last Thursday, do the first Sunday, and hoping that some of our first Sunday guest speakers will then come Thursday and do the YouTube or Facebook interview. In one case, they may be giving a talk here, and in the other case, I might interview them, or Andrew might interview them. One of us might interview them. I happen to be trained as a professional interviewer in consumer research, doing focus groups and that kind of thing. So we interview various folks at different stages of training, from the rank newcomer to old timers. We interviewed Tom, and Tom had just moved in and had just barely begun doing Zen practice. Last week was Mike. We interviewed Mike. Mike's been here, what, 20 years?
21 years.
Practicing here, and also martial arts and that kind of thing. So we look at talk show format on television, and it's kind of an old chestnut, kind of a cliche, right? But there's a reason for it. I mean, there wouldn't be so many, and they wouldn't be doing the same kind of thing if it didn't work. There's the monologue, right? There's the commercial break. We don't have that, of course. Then you go into the guests come in. They used to set the guests up, and they'd all stayed, right? And you'd end up with a couch full of guests. And that, I think, got confusing toward the end of the interview, toward the end of the process. So now one person comes out, and they're gone, right? And another person comes out, and they're gone. So looking back at the early teachings, when you read the Indian teachings, you see, like it or not, or believe it or not, there's Subhuti interviewing Buddha. There's Ananda, and Buddha's talking to Ananda, right? And Ananda's the audience is sitting here, right? And this one person is here as the sort of lever or focal point of the process of Buddha giving this teaching, while everybody can watch. And then once in a while, in the Sharingama Sutra, Buddha asks his disciples to come up one at a time and testify as to what was the first sense that unraveled in their meditation practice. You know, what there was this theory or this model of the mind as being like a silk scarf with 6 knots tied in: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, 6 senses. And you have to unravel those knots, right? And so he has them come up, and each person makes a statement about how that happened for them, how that worked for them. So this is like the panel on the news shows today. You have 4 or 5 people in the panel, and they ask different people about this, whatever political nightmare is going on at the moment, right? So not only is this a modern phenomenon where we kind of denigrate it and we think it's kind of not worthy of giving consideration. If you go all the way back 25 years to India, that's the approach they're using in these talks, in large part. So I invite those of you who might be interested to be an interviewee or to be on a panel where we interview. We'd like to get some young people who are just starting, young in the sense of Zen, and some more experienced people on the same panel, and maybe sort of compare notes. It's only a half hour, so we can't do too much. So the show, and if you know anybody that you think would be a good interview and a good guest, you want to tell Mike about, they'd be a good Sunday guest, and they'd be a good interview. So Mike will eventually be trying to help coordinate both programs, because they're what we call our in-reach. Andrew came with the term in-reach. We have outreach, where Andrew and I will go out and do consults with business. We'll show them how to do meditation at their office. And we do retreats where writers sit and then meditate for a half hour, write for an hour, meditate, write, meditate, write. We've done that type of workshop retreat. That's outreach. But we have in-reach here where we're bringing people in. So those of you who know somebody interesting out there, let us know about them, get us their contact, or ask them if they think they might be interested in coming and giving a talk and appearing on our Zen talk, where they may not be Zen, but we would be coming at them from a Zen perspective. Makes sense? So let us know. And if you want to attend the show, and if you want to be on the show, let us know. So the show is featured online on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel as archived, right? As well as streamed on Mixler, is it?
Just advertised on Facebook and
So if you're not here on a Thursday evening, you could listen to it on Mixler
or Facebook watching.
Yeah, okay. So we feel it is increasingly important at this time and in this cultural milieu. I was hoping Charles would still be here because French. He's French. He's traveling through, and he's going to Africa. He's an interesting character. It's the first time he showed up today. This cultural milieu, to allow the general audience to hear from people from all walks of life and diversity in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, profession, etc., as to why they practice Zen. Zen is mainstreaming in America, but it is still not understood, let alone practiced, by anywhere near a majority of our fellow citizens. Without first-person testimony as to the uniqueness of Zen's stripped-down design, it is likely to be lost in the smorgasbord of popular meditations on offer in the public realm. Bill Murray, mentioned in last month's Dharma Bite for his performance in Scrooged, also starred in an iconic film that seems to be in constant rerun status on TV, Groundhog Day. He wakes up day after day to the same day, marked by the iconic but irritating "I Got You, Babe" by Sonny Bono on his radio alarm. But he is the only one who is aware of this anomaly in the ordinary passage of time. As a consequence, he becomes liberated from his obsessive approach to doing what he's supposed to be doing, namely reporting on Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog, and finds that he has time to do the many things he has always wanted to do, including play the piano and ice sculpture, for example. He also finds the time to fall in love and to woo and win the love of his life, which is Hollywood, right? That's true for some of us too. The plot is said to mimic the life of a bodhisattva, according to one online commentator. I give the tricycle.org link there for that article. Leading off with a quote from Master Dogen. The life of one day is enough to rejoice. Even though you live for just one day, if you can be awakened, that one day is vastly superior to one endless life of sleep. If this day in the lifetime of 100 years is lost, will you ever touch it with your hands again? So I want to pause there for a moment and say a couple other things, and we have a few more questions, and I have about that much more. We often say here that the proposition in Buddhism is simple in concept, I think, difficult in execution. I think it's as simple as saying that we were all asleep this morning, assuming, right? I was up, I'm in the studio early morning, but we all woke up, right, from night's sleep. And we know the difference when we're awake and what we call asleep, right? We remember what it was like to be asleep and be relatively unconscious. So I think the proposition in Buddha's awakening is similar, that we're still asleep. And Matsuoka Roshi used to say this, and he'd quote Komazawa University and other scientific studies, say, we're about 10% awake, he would say. 90% of the brain is not functioning or sort of, shut off. Thank you. 90% of the mind. And so I think the proposition is very simple. We're still asleep, and we can wake up, and we will know the difference, just as surely as we know the difference between this waking state and what it is when we're asleep. Now, when we sit in Zazen, we begin to experience dreamlike states called hypnopompic and hypnagogic, which are where you're half awake, half asleep. And there's a great book I recommend to all of you on higher creativity, called Higher Creativity. It's about the history of people, inventors, scientists, artists, creative people and writers, learning how to use this state of mind, which is very uninhibited. When you're half awake, half asleep, it's where you may feel like you stumble and fall, right? And you trip and you feel vertigo and you're falling, but you're still just lying there. So the connection with what is called proprioception, where you are in space and how you feel your body in space, the connection with that with the brain cuts off. Like there's a switch that flips sometimes. That kind of thing happens in Zazen too. So we begin to see that the separation between waking and dreaming states is not very thick. It's a very thin line. I often retell my own personal experience with this in many different ways. But in one case, I was sitting in the Zendo at Bloomington at Okamura's place, a late night sit. Sitting up to 9 at night, we've been doing 50-minute periods all day long with 10 minutes walking, and for several days. So you're doing 17 hours a day. So I'm sitting there and I'm into a dream state, and somebody's holding a clipboard in front of me in the dream. I'm trying to read this strange writing on the clipboard, and that's happened in other dreams. So it's like a recurring icon for me. And in the next moment, I was still trying to read the clipboard. The writing on the clipboard was embedded in the Zendo wall. I was back in the Zendo, but the clipboard was still here, and I'm trying to read it. So you begin to find that working back and forth between, in your own experience, not theoretically, not conceptually, where you begin seeing that. And there are several references in the history of Zen to that kind of thing that Dogen is referring to here. Life of one day is enough to rejoice. If this day in the lifetime of 100 years is lost, will you ever touch it with your hands again? Vastly superior to one endless life of sleep. So there's an old saying, I can't remember where it's from, some of you remember it. If you realize this in the morning, it is okay to die in the evening, or something like that, right? I can't remember where that comes from. Some of you may remember. I'm not quoting it. correctly. So this is pointing at this waking up is the most important thing in life. It's what life is about. It's the most important thing we're here to do. And Dogen would refer to somebody, an ancestor, who was clearly fully awakened. His work is done. Done. Stick a fork in it, it's done. So I wanted to stop there and see if anybody had anything, question or comment, suggestion for amplification, clarification.
His work is done for what?
For this lifetime. Yeah.
So once you wake up for yourself, you're done.
Your work is done.
You wouldn't stick around for anybody else.
Yeah. Let's see. The work is the self. And what's the word I'm looking for? Self-obsessed part. So the self-absorbed. That's the work.
The work on yourself is done.
Yeah. Once that work is done, it's all play.
Yeah.
Sensei, the idea of this is what we're here for.
Say it again.
The statement, this is what we're here for.
Yeah.
I think you said, implies that somebody knows that there's a purpose for us. This is what we're here for. I don't understand it.
Somebody else? Does
Well, I
somebody
don't
else
know.
knows?
Yeah, I don't know. Who says this is what we're here for? How do you know this is
The
what we're
person
here for?
the true person, the person who knows. Doesn't mean they can convince anybody else. That's why the Zen people set up monasteries and places where you can go and practice Zen with somebody who supposedly knows.
So it's not a blanket statement that, hey, everybody in the world, this is what we're here for. We're all here to wake up.
So when
That's our purpose that God intended.
when Huinang's
If there was a God.
it's a word. It's a word. Let's be subjunctive about it. If there were a God. Huinang, eventual successor came one day and he said, "Where from?" and told him where he'd been practicing, studying. And he says, "What is it that thus comes?" So you could say the purpose of life is to know what it is that thus comes. He didn't have an answer, so he practiced with him for 8 years and came in one day and said, to name it would be to miss the point, to miss it. To try to name it would be to miss it. And Huineng doesn't miss a beat. He comes right back and says, is it dependent on practice enlightenment? So the guy says, it's not that there's not practice enlightenment, it's just that they cannot be defiled.
So the goal is to not know what comes.
Huh?
Is the goal to not know what comes?
The goal?
Goal.
The goal?
The goal is to not know what comes.
You would have to say that the goal of life is as various as living beings. Every living being, you could say, is the goal of life and has the goal of life. So there's no one goal. For human beings, I think Zen takes the position that this is, waste no time in doubts and arguments that have nothing to do with this. So the Xing Xing Ming, that's it. All the rest of it is kind of window dressing and it's all related, right? But this is the central question. This is a central issue.
And I don't want Brian and I to, because we could both keep you going.
I know.
But one more
You may be
thing.
inspiring people.
But one more thing, because this is, has been on my mind, and this idea of purposeful purposelessness, which is, what's our purpose? What do we sit for? We sit with no goal, and yet we're, that's not quite
Purpose
honest
is not
either.
goal, though. Purpose is not goal. They're not the same. They don't mean the same.
How do you distinguish them?
Purpose is the truth. It's ongoing. Goal is something that can be accomplished.
Purpose is the end for which something is designed. The goal is, I don't know.
The goal can be defined, some goals. The goal in Zen is said to be too broad, too deep to define. Purpose is often connected to utility. What's the purpose of this? Or what's this designed to do? What's the utility?
So
And it reminds me of the question that the Chinese Tenzo asked Dogen. Dogen was assiduously reading through all the stuff he could find and making notes and stuff. Apparently, the story goes when he was in China, and this old man says, "What are you doing there?" You know, he said, "Well, I'm studying the Dharma and this and that." What do you say? He said, "What's the long time? What's the point of that? What's the purpose of that?" Or no, I think the translator said, "What's the good of that?" It's the same idea. And he said, "Well, you know, going back to Japan and be able to learn this and teach other people this. What's I can't remember the exact word he used, but what's the point of that?" No, goes on and he said, "But no, I mean, what's the long-term point of that?" And Dogen said, "I realized he was right, you know, I'm trying to do this way and learn this, and I have all these goals in mind and these objectives. But if I don't really get this, you know, personally and experientially, you know, what's the point? I'm just wasting my time, doubts and arguments that have nothing to do with this." These are all pointing at it, right? They're pointing at it. But if you don't get it, that was a waste of time. So in Zen, we say, just go directly to it, right? These are all roundabout. Somebody else was waiting.
Let's see, I think that's one of the challenges of simply Zen, is that Zen seems to lack an object, a particular object for meditation. But when you contemplate Zen Buddhism, the Buddhist canon, there are very particular, there's truths that are to be appreciated and then realized. There are triple treasure to be actualized, and then there's also the precepts that are the foundations. Or if you come to a Buddhist center, then this is what we're here for. If you don't want to, you're interested in something else, then there's probably another group that's doing that.
And those teachings are important. They're like, Andrew's working on a text about mentoring, and has a lot to do with mentoring. And in any field, music, art, you know, science, Zen, that's what the relationship is about, right? I mean, there's some content to what we're doing. It's not like there's no content to it. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't study, right? It means you shouldn't substitute study for direct experience.
And these things that Terry, you're talking about they're, I don't know, parameters or guides, but they're not prescriptive so much as they are pointing the way.
And they're not restrictive, I would say, either. They don't, they're not limiting, they're more expanding.
You know, there's also talk of like container. So here are the physical forms that act as a container for what we're doing here, and then what Buddha Zen is doing is attempting to wake up, get enlightened to the reality of the noble truths. You know, I think coming back to the noble truths is it's safe. It's safe to talk about awakening when it's.
The
You
container,
have to know what truth is.
container to Terry's point, the container that is built around this, the Dogen says, grass, trees, and walls to bring forth the teaching for all beings. Walls, meaning, Zen centers and so forth. Grass, trees, and walls bring forth the teaching for all beings. So nature, yes, but also man's works, and in particular, the artifacts of Buddhism that are pointing at this. This place is designed and built for this purpose only. I mean, we can do other things here, but this is not meant to be, a church. It's not meant to be a dance hall. It's not. It's meant for this purpose that we come here for this point, to practice this and to the trappings, admittedly mostly Japanese. The tradition and heritage is still important, and we don't want to throw it out with bathwater, right? But we understand that it's empty, fundamentally empty. The container only contains in the sense that it walls out the rest of the chaos for a while, right? And allows us this sanctuary to be able to do this practice, right? So in a sense, it doesn't matter what it is, but we take our cue, from the ancients and the simplicity of the design of the environments in which this has been practiced through the centuries. Is to keep all the chatter and nonsense out of the room, out of the way. We sit facing a blank wall, for God's sake, for Buddha's sake. Right? I mean, what could be? The only thing I can think of is those things you look in when you're testing your peripheral vision. A big white dome. You can't see anything but the big white dome. That's a design issue. Anybody else? So.
I wonder if this is along the lines of what Andrew's thinking. Let me just try to say something and then respond, claim it or anything. But what if all purposes are just mind generated, and ultimately purpose is not part of the scheme of anything? I mean, evolution, we can talk about the purpose, the function of the eye and everything. But, purpose does not belong to physics. And even when we ask, what is the purpose of evolution? There's no reason, purpose for why evolution happens in the biochemical universe.
Evolution is not a first cause. It's not an explanation of first cause. It's an explanation of process, how it works, right? But in religion, we have the first cause is God, and that's purposeful.
So when the designer disappears, again, this is all, you take that out, even when the galaxies collide and ultimately all life is going to disappear.
We don't know
the universe doesn't care.
That's a hypothesis. But I think what you're getting at is purposelessness is held to high esteem in Zen. Why? Because any purpose you can identify is going to fall short. Right? So we say purposeless. Zen is purposeless. It's useless. It's worthless. It's a waste of time. We wouldn't say that.
What was Tenzo's explanation for his buying and preparing food then? Like if you were to ask the same question to the Tenzo
He asked a Tenzo that the Tenzo was laying out mushrooms to dry in the hot sun is 100 degrees heat. So why can't somebody else do this? An old man, obviously dripping sweat probably. And he said, they are not me. So he used that one to point out the true self. The true self is the one that can do what has to be done that somebody else could do it. But on an absolute level, nobody else can do what this person can do. That's not a bragging statement. That's just a statement of truth. Mm-hmm. You can't do what I do. I can't do what you do. Since they said your enlightenment is yours, mine is mine, you can't get mine, I can't get yours.
So in that sense, there is a hole in the universe that's like perfectly shaped, like every single person or every single being. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? In other words, that Tenzo had to be there, being a Tenzo at that moment.
And Uchiyama Roshi said, your whole world dies with you. Yeah. Nobody has your world. You're the only one who has it.
Well, I think
one way that you could tie the study of Zen into the process of evolution is imagine how evolution must look to a horseshoe crab if there was one that was bright enough to understand the question. Horseshoe crabs haven't changed one bit since the Devonian period, which was 350 million years. So they would probably look at human life as like, God, what a waste of time. I mean,
It's a blip on the screen for one thing.
one thing, but I got it right. I got it right 350 million years. And, you know, all of these other beings are, you know, just bouncing off the walls and
Trying to get it right.
technology, and all I need is mud. You know? Mud and salt water.
So anybody else? Go ahead, move on.
I posted a thing on our website or on Facebook page, and we got some interesting comments back about it. This was a few days ago. It's supposedly a quote by Alan Watts. It said, I had a discussion with a great master in Japan, and we were talking about the various people who were working to translate Zen books into English, and he said, that's a waste of time. If you really understand Zen, you can use any book. You could use the Bible. You could use Alice in Wonderland. You could use a dictionary, because the sound of the rain needs no translation.
Sound of the Rain?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that in modern koan practice in Rinzai, sometimes people were quoting Alice in Wonderland as their answer to the koan. Okay, so where did we leave off? Okay.
Can I just ask, Joe, did you finish what you were?
Did you get done with that?
Wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, I
No,
did,
okay.
but maybe not you.
I'm adapting the new interruptive style of interviewing. Television.
Well, in that case, I got something.
So, again, if you can be awakened, that one day is vastly superior to one in this life of sleep. And the other comment I had on that is when Buddha woke up and he came down off the mountain, like they all do, and they said, what are you? And he said, I'm awake, I'm fully awake, which is the meaning of the word Buddha, right? The fully awakened one. Everybody else must have looked like the zombie movies, right? Everybody's sleepwalking around in their dream state, thinking they're awake and alive and doing everything. And he's the only one in the room that's awake. When he said, I'm fully awake, it's not a put down, a pejorative. He's just saying the reason I look like this and moving like this, you know, it's like getting contact high with somebody who's overdid their insulin that morning. You know, there are bubbles popping around them and you start feeling bubbles popping around you. You know, it had to be something like that for him where he could see, and he was said to have gone through a debate with himself. That's what these lotus blossoms represent. That maybe he didn't have anything to teach. Maybe nobody could understand it. Maybe it couldn't help. But he reasoned that everybody must be somewhat in the stage of blossoming like the lotus blossom at all of its stages. Some of them had to be ready to really bloom, right? And maybe he could just say something about it and it would trigger the same thing in them. So this is where the sort of belief or tenet in Zen comes in. Buddha nature is innate. We all have this ability to wake up just as we woke up from sleeping this morning. Human beings have this ability. Traditionally, cows, chickens, dogs, cats, not so much, right? So I have to admit that as time goes on, my daily life often seems to be a rerun of the same old patterns of demands and responses. You know, not quite as deja vu as Groundhog Day, but for example, when I'm striving to meet a deadline, as I've been doing here lately on an art commission, a large art commission, and especially when nothing seems to be working. Doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results is a well-known version of a famous line, that way lies madness, from King Lear. In Zen, we do the same thing over and over. We meditate. So are we expecting different results with consequent disappointment? Or are we not expecting different results or not even expecting any results at all? First, let's challenge the idea that we are actually doing the same thing again and again in meditation or anything else for that matter. One of the most artful accomplishments of Groundhog Day is that the same scenes are filmed again and again, with only Bill Murray's part differing, as far as can be detected from the vicarious perspective of the viewing audience, at least. Having worked on a feature film as a prop master, where my role was to make sure that all the material props in the scene stay where they're supposed to be for the sake of, or take after take, for the sake of continuity, instead of magically moving from one spot to another, I can appreciate how difficult technically that must have been. I feel sure that if you were to compare like scenes side by side, you would be able to find subtle differences. But with the flow of time, short-term memory is lost, and the suspension of disbelief allows for the repetition to be perceived as a perfect do-over. But in fact, of course, it is physically impossible to replicate the same events, the same action, the same dialogue twice. So again, kudos to the skill of the actors, director, and cameramen, not to mention the stagehands on the set for the illusion. If we apply the same concept to meditation, we can see that it is not really possible for any two periods of Zazen to be the same. Everything in the ambient environment is different, though we do our best to keep it the same in the Zendo. More importantly, everything in our life is different from one day to the next, which forms the content of our meditation after all, and therefore can never be exactly the same. Even in the same day of a retreat, each meditation session is in a different part of the day, and so cannot be anywhere near the same, actually. In an hour of sitting, our location on the planet relative to the spin of rotation places us roughly 1,000 miles east of where we started out. If I have the physics correct. Of course, a star may have gone nova somewhere in that time as well, but as long as it's not old Sol, we are blithely unaware of such a cataclysmic change. Beyond our own personal practice, the social relationship we have to the others in the Zen Center, as well as our other daily life communities, is ever changing. That we are changing moment by moment means that everyone we know is also changing moment by moment. Thus, our relationships are changing moment by moment, squared, so to speak, though they may seem to remain painfully or joyfully the same. This is where the life of the Bodhisattva comes into play in our own lives. And this is where this tale comes to an end. So now you have to fill it in. So how is this where the life of Bodhisattva comes into play? There's one question. There isn't a third sheet, but it's blank.
We should just publish it like that.
Yeah. The blank pages for you to fill in. We should have books like that. Every third page is blank. Okay, here's one. Okay.
So are we trying to tie together kind of the Bodhisattva with what's the purpose of Zen training?
Yeah, and in the context of Groundhog Day, where everything seems to be same again and again, right? And we try to find the time to do the things that a Bodhisattva would do, like learn to play the piano. Like Casey's got one.
We do the Bodhisattva vow, which is to vow the impossible.
To help all beings
Or seemingly
before ourselves. Quantitatively, it's impossible.
Right.
Qualitatively, it's doable.
So, and this idea of Groundhog Day is that idea of doing something over and over that seems frustrating, and yet in the end of that movie, at least, there is an outcome. There is something that may change. So there's hope. I don't know. That's how it was the first thing that came to mind, linking the Bodhisattva vow, at least, to, maybe that's why you mentioned earlier that the Bill Murray character was a Bodhisattva in some way.
Well, if you go to this website, there's a, I guess a Zen priest It's published in Tricycle. The link here. It goes into great detail on creating a parallel analog between Bill Murray's character and the nature of what it means to be a bodhisattva. I didn't want to go into great detail on it because this is another point I'm trying to make.
One of the I'm thinking about the Dharma bite that you're writing, and one of the things that might be interesting to bring into that, there's an essay by Camus on Sisyphus. Yeah, which is very similar to this, right, in a lot of ways. And he goes, I haven't read it in a long time, but it's this idea. He sort of imagines Sisyphus as being, I don't know whether it's joyous or self-satisfied or having a sense of well-being. But basically this idea that of doing something absurd like that over and over and over again, the natural outcome is to throw yourself into what you're doing, which sounds a lot like Zen, right? That he imagined Sisyphus as sort of throwing himself into his work and being very, for lack of a better word, mindful about what he's doing. And that it doesn't really matter what you're doing. I think you could tie back into this idea of Zen training. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. As long as you're doing Zen, you could be doing Zen training or rolling a rock up the hill. It doesn't matter because it's all there. Or reading Alice in Wonderland. If it's all there, it doesn't matter. But the idea of training in Zen, the idea of, I don't know if this is about training in Zen or if this is about training people in training for Zen. I don't know if this is about the retreats that you're doing or if it's about actually Zazen. But if it's about the retreats, it seems like that supports the practice, which allows you to see that it doesn't really matter what you're doing.
Yeah, the whole idea of training is an interesting idea in itself. And we have a program of training, right, where we have designed how we train others. And sometimes people use the expression, we're training the trainers. And because the people you train become trainers themselves and train others. So it's kind of an endless cycle that way. But if you ask yourself, what is training of any kind comprised of? What is training? It's an interesting question. And when you start applying it to Zen, you can see how it works and how we don't throw out what our ancestors have given us. I started out trying to train everybody the way Matsuoka trained me. And it was a turning point at which I realized I'm not Matsuoka, and my students are not me. So the way I think about it is you have to have flexibility of mind in the beginning to imitate your teacher, right? But then eventually you have to have flexibility of mind to innovate, especially in order to train others, right? So some of us are teachers, many of us are teachers, and have taught something, even if we're not professional teachers. And those are, I think, some of the kind of lessons we learn, right? No, we say Zen cannot be taught, but it can be learned. So training is somewhere between teaching and learning, right? I can train you the way I was trained. Hopefully if it had a positive effect on me, maybe it'll have a positive effect for you, right? But I don't pretend to be your teacher, not in any deep, absolute sense, right? But I will not step aside from the responsibility since I'm sitting here in this, I will not let you have you come in here and say, guess what? I'm not the teacher. And then, well, I could say that as a shock tactic, right? I could say that everything is the teacher, and that would all be true. But that's not a cop-out. That does not allow me to sidestep my responsibility to work with you as much as I can in a collaborative effort. Like the chicken pecking at the egg is the metaphor we use, right? The chick inside is pecking at the same eggshell. Eventually the eggshell cracks. The chick and the hen are both in the same reality now, right? So if you say that the training is the pecking, the infant chick already knows how to train. Being born and being alive is all part of the training. So this is the natural path. Not a natural path, natural path, right? We have the natural posture, the natural breath, eventually, hopefully, the natural frame of mind, and also eventually, hopefully, a natural relationship to our culture and society, right?
It is the same point, but just using the myth of Sisyphus and just very succinctly, and then the Zen response. But Sensei, you know, from an objective point of view, what Sisyphus is doing, it's absolutely absurd. And the entire meaning in that is given by Sisyphus himself. What is the difference between that and a Zen view?
Zen is, somebody said Zen is the pursuit of the understanding of meaning. So Sisyphus, if he comes to understand the meaning of what he's doing, then, you know, what else is there? Understanding of meaning is not circular. It's not redundant. There are many things we understand, like how to drive a car, but we don't know the meaning until we see climate change. Right? That's part of the meaning of driving the car. That didn't occur to us. A lot of things are very deeply meaningful, like having a child, a death, a divorce. You know. Even job changes are meaningful, but we don't necessarily understand them. They're not necessarily logical, right? So understanding and meaning are not the same. So Zen is the pursuit of the understanding of meaning. What is the meaning of this? That's a thing. One of my favorite expressions. Grandpa comes in, what's the meaning of this? Kids are screwing up somehow. Maybe your grandpa didn't say that, mine didn't.
So Sensei, is that the difference? I mean, Camus would say that there is no meaning there. The meaning is projected. But in the way that you're speaking, there is a meaning there.
There is a meaning, but it's not necessarily human. It's not necessarily accessible to human intelligence or logic. It definitely is meaningful because guess what? There isn't anything else to be meaningful.
The difference is Sisyphus was being punished. He didn't have a choice. That's what makes Sisyphus different from the rest of us.
I don't think there's any difference.
Well, wait a minute.
I don't know.
Let's stick with that for a minute because consider capital.
I don't think there's any difference. It looks different. It's not any different.
Well, we're all in for it, right?
Yeah.
There's no escape. But consider capital punishment. We punish you by killing you.
For killing someone.
Well, for whatever. But I mean, we consider killing you a punishment. So the death sentence, right? Death is not the punishment. Death is built in. The guy pulling the switch is going to die. They have 3 different people pull the switch, so you can't tell who actually killed the guy. Or 3 people doing the thing that drops the thing into the acid, so the gas it kills him. You can't fault one of these 3 guys. It's the most absurd idea in the world. That somehow I escape responsibility for this death by being one of 3 people pulling 3 switches. And we don't know which one is which. Somebody, the wizard behind the screen said, I know which one it is. You killed him. You killed him. Death is not a punishment. The only punishment is I decide when and how you're going to die. That's the same thing you're saying with Sisyphus. Somebody else decided you're going to be pushed that rock up the hill forever, and I decide that you don't have any choice. That's the only reason that death, capital punishment, is a punishment.
I think, I mean, the myth of Sisyphus is it's an essay on the absurd, you know, and it's supposed to be like we don't have. There is, I mean, like you look at Sisyphus and you say, well, all the meaning that he had in his life has been completely taken away because now for all of eternity he has to roll a rock up the hill. And I think what Camus is saying is that's really all of us, right? I mean, we bring meaning to it, and I think what he's saying is it's not really a goal or an outcome; it's an intention.
Right. I would agree with that, but you got to look at what was the Buddha's last piece of advice to his own monks: don't squander your life.
Right. Right.
So meaning, I think, is whatever it was you did to keep your life from being squandered. And if you can throw yourself wholeheartedly into pushing a rock up a hill, knowing it's just going back to the other side, you know, if you were able to get meaning from that, then you didn't squander it.
Yeah, I think that's the point, right? It's kind of like if all you did in your life was chop wood and carry water, well, how did you chop wood and carry water? Because it looks the same. from the outside.
Yeah.
You know, but did you chop wood and carry water the same way Sisyphus threw himself into rolling a rock up the hill? Because it's pretty absurd, right? The water's going to go away. You're going to have to get more. The wood's going to go away. You're going to have to get more. It's the same thing.
Well, it's no less absurd than getting a car, fighting traffic for an hour.
I'm not saying it's less absurd. I'm saying it's exactly the
I'm
same.
agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you. You know, and then dealing with a halfway psychotic boss for 10 hours and then fighting traffic another hour home.
It's just rolling a rock.
It's just rolling a rock.
If Sisyphus ever got to the point, the suicidal point of desperation with it, very easy out. Just let the rock roll back over.
That's talked about in the essay too. Why not suicide, right?
Why not
That's in the essay. Yeah.
Well, why not suicide? Because if you commit suicide, you don't get to find out what happens next.
Okay, in the last
Not
few
what
minutes
happens
we
next,
have,
but
let's go around.
What
the room
happens
and
now?
Ask it. Zara, if you have a comment, question, you have to make.
No, I know.
Liz,
This has been very interesting.
what do you find interesting about it?
Well, my knowledge of Buddhism is from a art historian's perspective, teaching Buddhism as part of an Asian art class, and so there's a difference in perspective, of course, between historical knowledge of a history of a philosophy versus seeing the practice of it. So I find that very.
We say Zen is the meditation sect of Buddhism, where we take action. We do it. We do what Buddha did and what Buddha said to do. That's what I like about it when I first confronted it. And, there's something to do. I'm not just listening to somebody talk. So I'm going to skip those if had something to say. Anything further?
Just a side note, I think because ultimate reality is formless, you know, and relies on humans with words and language to develop the form and the cultures that operate in ultimate purposelessness. That in one way that the Zen forms are taught is that because this is how we find our way in humans, find our way in the world. We construct these language and forms and adopt purposes that are supportive of ourselves and others.
In design, especially communication design, it's the same idea that you have to give it the form, recognition, memorability, appropriateness that will help it cut through the clutter. All of the communication that's blindsiding everybody all the time. So if Zen didn't have a shape or a form, it could not be perceived. And so it's given a traditional, form, and then people say, well, let's get all the Japanese out of it. How are you going to do that? What are you going to have left? So it's not Japanese, it's not Chinese, it's not Indian, it's not American. It's transcultural. It can't be caught in a cultural bottle. And yet it has to have a form. And Zen has been plastic enough, flexible enough throughout its history that it survived India. It survived all the warring in China. It survived all the warring in Japan and the Far East and Korea and so forth, because it has this rootedness in reality to it. It isn't a theory. It isn't a hypothesis. It isn't a political philosophy or anything like that. It's just pointing at reality. And so at least my attitude about all the other forms of practices and meditations and teachings, they're on like tributaries, rivers to this ocean, which we call Zen. That's a word for it. Dogen said, don't even call it Zen. It's not Zen. Don't call it Zen. You have to call it something. You have to name that concept, as we say in design. You have to name it what it is, and you have to give it a shape. Or it's not. It blends into everything, and there's no way for people to access it. I mean, in some cultures, there is no art. In tribal cultures, there's no art as a separate thing. Art is built into everything, so they're artisans, right? And I'm sure in some cultures, there's no such thing as music, right? In tribal cultures, it's all built into everything else, religion and the culture and how we call people together, and it's all musical, right? So we say Zen, it's just a word we're throwing against the wall, hoping it sticks, and, you know. It's a meaningless word. It's a misnomer, actually. It means Chan or Jhana. That's not what, Zen is not meditation, not contemplation. So it's a historical misnomer, a phonetic misnomer, actually. Anything else? You haven't said boo. Say boo.
Yeah, I don't want to get like super wrapped up into this, about the Sisyphus conversation as to whether or not what he's doing is meaningful. There's the kind of human sensation of like feeling connected to what you do, feeling like it's not, you know, I think all of us at one time or another kind of experienced the absurd frustration and almost desperation of like, you know, I don't know what this means. I don't see the point of this. So whether we argue or not, like what Sisyphus is, you know, how Sisyphus feels about his work make it any more or less meaningful, or is there a meaning beyond that? Like, you know, he might not be able to see the point, but that his work still might be meaningful.
Is that a rhetorical question?
I mean, that's kind of my understanding, but I could be wrong.
I think you could say in Zen, it's the pursuit of the understanding of meaning, which means we have to admit that we don't know what it means. The don't know mind is also very highly valued in Zen, whatever you think that might mean. Simply not knowing, kind of innocent primordial ignorance. I call this a column. What do you call it? If you say it's a column, you assert a reality. If you deny it's a column, you deny the reality. Now tell me quickly what it is.
It's a column.
Move. It certainly wouldn't be column in French. So, Joseph.
A lot to take home and sit with about this, and I think the thing that sticks with me is,
Pick up a little bit.
I'm sorry, is there's a difference between making meaning and finding meaning. And I think that when I sit in Zazen and crap floats up, if I attach to it, I think I've found meaning. And so I try not to do that. That's one of the purpose. We're not talking about purposes, but that's one of the things that happens in Zazen. So that's not where meaning comes from. The Sisyphus thing is about how you make meaning and whether you can. And that's just something I need to sit with. I don't have a conclusion to this.
Good.
This is just what has sort of struck me and that I'll take home with me.
Tommy.
You gotta push a rock, push it the best you got. Push that rock. I mean, if you gotta eat crap, you better eat it fast and well. You gotta do it. That's one thing I'm trying to teach my kid is you gotta go to school. There are things that you have to do, and you might as well enjoy it because you can only do it. And that's a hard pill for me to accept a lot of times.
Andrew's trying to write this book about mentorship around being a message to his daughters. You know, how do you find what are mentors? How important are they? You know, how do you find them? Et cetera, that kind of a. He's looking for that different thread. That, you know.
I mean, I think, you know, and I do it all the time. If I complain about having to do something, it's just gonna just makes me feel bad.
I had a mentor that, back to what Mike was talking about all the stuff we do that in the meantime kind of thing. He used to say, he's the guy who taught me how to build this stick furniture, amongst other things. And he used to say, well, what do you do till the doctor comes? If something would come up and it would be a discussion or a conflict or something, he said, what do you do till the doctor comes? I didn't know what he meant by that for a long time, but after a while, I realized he meant, what do you do until you're on your deathbed? Right? And what you're doing in the meantime, all the stuff you're doing is sort of like not quite as important as what you do when the doctor comes. You know, what do you do till the doctor comes? How are you going to spend your time, your life, right? And that's a fundamental question. So should we do the closing verse?
Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it.
Glad you were here to stick on. I couldn't tell you down. Thank you all for your patience in listening, and do consider coming Thursday evenings and being interviewed. Joseph, we're going to interview you on Bodhidharma when we run.
Okay. Sounds good.